Good afternoon. I'm Zaquana Stevens with Families Together New York State and the Community Technical Assistance Center. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Discharge Planning for Family Peer Advocates. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to orient everyone so you know how to participate in today's event. Please note that upon joining the webinar, you will be placed on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract others from listening to the presentation. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to the host who will be able to assist you. If you have the opportunity to submit questions for the Q&A portion of today's presentation, please utilize the chat box feature. Click the dialog button on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen to open the chat feature. And in order to ensure that we're able to answer as many questions as time permits, we are requesting that you send your questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. We would appreciate if you would take a moment to fill out a brief feedback survey that will appear on your screen after you close out of the webinar, and let us know if you have any suggestions or topics that you'd like for us to cover. The recording and presentation slides for this presentation will be posted on the CTAC website at ctacny.org within the next 2 to 3 business days. We're very excited to have with us today Ashley Sadon of the Family Workforce Development Coordinator at Families Together. And once again, thank you again for joining us. And I'll pass it along to Ashley.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here. As Aquana said, we're going to be talking about discharge planning for family peer advocates. I am Ashley Sandoni. I'm the Family Workforce Development Coordinator, and I'm living in upstate New York. Just to give you a little bit about me, and we will get started. The learning outcomes at the end of this course, FPAs or family peer advocates should have an increased awareness of the following. This is what we'll be talking about today. Indicators of when a family is ready for discharge, how to prepare a family for discharge. So what that looks like when we're thinking that the family is ready to be discharged from our services, and then how to prepare a family. So how to get that family ready to become independent. And then once the family is discharged, how are we going to maintain that professional relationship with the family? And lastly, how to manage your own well-being after you release a family or after we discharge a family. What does that look like for us practicing self-care? So we say discharge a family. What does that mean? Discharging a family is going to refer to the conclusion of their involvement in the program. We want to remember that services are voluntary, so a family can choose to end their services at any time. Family peer support services are discontinued. So when we are talking about a discharge, that's what we mean. So, what are some reasons a family may end services? We will go into more detail on all these topics later. The family has graduated and no longer needs services. Both the FPA and the family agree that they have completed their goals and are ready for independence. And again, remember the family is going to have the final say in that. Perhaps the family has moved out of a service area. If you are working in maybe a certain part of New York or a certain county, has the family moved out of that county? And what can we do about that? The family is no longer eligible for services, so something has changed, making that family ineligible, excuse me. Maybe their insurance changed, something changed. They no longer eligible for our services. The family no longer wants to receive services, so the family decided they do not want or need our services. Sometimes we may not agree with this decision, but we have to remember that this is the family's decision. The youth transition into adulthood. So at the age of 21, the youth will transition out of family peer support services. And lastly, there has been little to no engagement. In the coming section, we're going to be looking at what it means to, or exploring a planned discharge, what that means for the family and what that means for the FPA. So first thing we're going to look at is indicators of readiness. So indicators of readiness are skills that a family may exhibit, showing that they are ready to be independent from our services. So the first thing is communication. FPAs can look for these when we're working with families, watching for increased skills in these areas. First is communication. So the family can clearly state what they want and what they need. They have open lines of communication to service providers. So maybe they are starting to communicate effectively with teachers, staff, maybe some of their youth's or the child's other service providers, whether it be therapists or doctors. They're able to effectively communicate and they know how to do so. And they are able to communicate amongst themselves. So the youth can communicate with their parent or caregiver, and the parent and caregiver can communicate effectively with the youth. So we're going to see an increase in those skills. Second is advocacy. This kind of goes right along with communication. The family is able to speak up for themselves, expressing what they need for themselves, for their child, and for the family. This might be at doctors' offices. This may be again at IEP meetings. And I think it's important when we're working with the family to teach the child or the youth how to advocate for themselves. We may be working directly with the parents, but we will see those skills in the parents and maybe in the youth if we do see the youth. Clear family boundaries. This may include cultural, religious, or social preferences. This also goes along with advocacy and communication. The family can clearly communicate their boundaries. The family may express boundaries in communicating family roles, the language they want to use while they're at home, and their religious practices. So they are clear on what their boundaries are, and they are not afraid to make that boundary line with service providers in their home and outside of their home. Adequate support systems. So this may include natural supports, family, friends. We'll notice that the family has those supports around them, but this also may include community support, such as churches, groups that the family may be involved in, food pantries, and more. We want to remember that we can't be the family's only support. So as we are working with a family, we want to see an increase in some of those supports, whether it's community supports or natural supports in their lives. And lastly is decision-making skills. And again, this goes with everything here. We want to see the family think about the different decisions they have, make a decision and stand by it and advocate for themselves, set their boundaries and communicate that decision. We'll see an increase in that skill as well. So now we have been working with a family. We see an increase in skills. Maybe we see the family advocating for themselves. And we may, as family peer advocates, think that the families have acquired the skills they need to advocate for themselves and for their child. Maybe the family feels they have accomplished their goals. So what happens next? As an FPA, we may believe the family is ready for discharge. Sometimes the family may not agree with us. We have to remember the family's in the driver's seat, and it's going to be up to them to decide when and the service is ready to end. So when we start having this conversation, we want to keep that in mind. So here are some questions that we may ask a family when we start seeing some of those skills. We want to remember to try to keep open communication and open-ended questions, right? So some of these questions are open-ended, and that we can pull information from these questions to kind of gather information to fill out if the family is ready for discharge or not. So one of those questions we might ask is, how do you feel about discharging? So we can ask the family, instead of saying, do you feel ready to discharge? Like the second question right here, do you feel you're ready? If we ask it in that way, the family might just say no. or yes, and that kind of ends the conversation. So we want to make sure that we keep that conversation going and we kind of gather our evidence to feel out if the family is comfortable and ready for discharge. So how do you feel about discharging? When we ask in that way, the family may say, I'm not comfortable yet, or I feel that I'm comfortable and I can advocate for my family, but I don't want to lose your services. They might answer in that way, but we can kind of pull some information from that. Another question we might ask is, what does your safety plan look like? So, does a family have a plan in place? This might include food pantries, what happens in an emergency, who they can call, um, who to call and where to go if there was an emergency or to get services they need. And again, what other services are you receiving? That kind of goes with the safety plan, making sure the family has services in place. If our services are to end, what other services do they have? And lastly, what natural supports do you have in place? So again, do you have friends? Do you have family there to support you? Are you involved in a church or a community in some way? We want to make sure that the family has natural supports in place so that when we leave, we're not leaving the family with no support. I do want to open it up in the chat to ask what other questions we might ask. So what might that look like? Are there other questions that some of us may ask to determine if the family is ready for discharge? We can pop some of those in the chat. I'll pause here for a minute. Another question that might come to mind is, where would you like to go from here? So maybe finding out what the family's direction is and where they would like to go with services. I will leave that question open. If anyone wants to answer, you can go ahead and pop that in the chat, or you can unmute themselves if you do prefer to do that to answer this question. I'll leave it for another minute if anyone has any suggestions, and then we'll move on. Jessica says she would like to know when they have last been in contact with their natural support. That's a great question. So maybe they do say they have natural supports, right? But maybe it's been 3 months since they talked to them. And so we want to make sure, yes, that if you have natural supports in place, that we are contacting them. Um, I sometimes might ask, in an emergency, who are you going to call? So that's kind of like that question is, if there's an emergency, do you have somebody you can call who can kind of drop everything and show up? We want to make sure that they have those natural supports. Michelle says, how do you feel about the plans in place? Yes. Are you comfortable with it and do you understand it? Those are great questions. We want to make sure the family is comfortable. We want to make sure they're ready and that they know what to do. Thank you for that. And understanding it as well, she mentioned. Do you understand? We want to make sure the family knows what the discharge is going to look like and make sure they understand it. Do you have other goals you need to share from William? Yeah, there are other goals they want to work on. That's an open-ended question. Is a plan of what they want? Michelle asked. So yes, is this something you would like to do? We want to make sure if we feel as FPAs that the family's ready to discharge, that we are not pushing that discharge, right? We want to make sure, like all these questions are asking, that the family is comfortable with it, that they understand it, and this is something they want to do. We want to make sure we're partnering with this family as we work towards a discharge. Carmen asks, what is your next step after discharge? Yeah, so what direction do you want to go? Where would you like to go? And what is your next step? Any more? I'll leave it for a couple more seconds and then we will move on to the next slide. I really appreciate all those questions and the comments. Those are really great questions and things to think about. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead on to the next slide. If you do have other questions, you are more than welcome to pop them in there, but we're going to move to the next. Okay, so now maybe the family and the FPA said they both agree that the family has completed their goals. How do we know that? What does that look like? The family feels that they have accomplished their goals. So in this instance, families can come to us and they can say that they feel like they are, they have completed their goals. Maybe there's nothing else they want to work on. We want to make sure we ask open-ended questions and take the family's direction, especially if you as an FPA don't necessarily agree that the family has accomplished their goals. We want to make sure that the family is comfortable and that they have nothing else they want to work on. We want to put that family in the driver's seat, but we also want to coach them and guide them to make sure they really are comfortable where they are and that they feel they accomplished their goals. And the family's goals and objectives have been achieved. Maybe the family and the FPA both agree that the family has achieved their goals and objectives. So we really want to have that conversation with the family. Progress notes and assessments, like the family assessments of needs or strengths, otherwise known as FANS, if you use it, can be used as a tool to measure the family's progress. So we're having a conversation, the family might be ready to be discharged. We can use our progress notes and assessments that we have done to kind of go back and look at the family in the beginning, where they've been, where they are now, and where they'd like to go. We can measure their progress and how far they've come. This is also a great tool to use to show the family their strengths and where they've come. And then there are no other goals or objectives the family wants to work on. The family might not have anything else they want to work on. They have supports in place and they are confidently able to advocate for their family. Um, So how can we show a family their own strengths? We just kind of mentioned that a family, um, they may not be ready for discharge, and the FPA may think that the family is ready for discharge. We want to, as FPAs, want to work ourselves out of a job, I like to say. Um, we want the family to be able to advocate for themselves and become independent. So how do we get that family to that point? If we can see their skills and their strengths, how do we show the family? We kind of just talked about it a little bit. The family might not have any goals in mind, but they want to continue peer support services. Some of you may have been through this where you're working with a family for a really long time, right? And they are, they're doing great. They're contacting their teachers, communicating with their other service providers. They're advocating for their child. They are just, doing everything really great. But they don't want to lose your services, right? And we would, as much as we'd probably like to, we can't stay open forever with families, especially when they're doing so great. We want those families to use their skills and advocate for themselves, right? So what can we do in that situation? We can first start slowly spread the visits apart. So if we're meeting with the family weekly, maybe we can move that to bi-weekly or maybe once every 3 weeks, maybe monthly. That's something we can do. And again, we talked about this, but use the evidence of progress notes. Show the family where they've come from, how far they came, right? So maybe they are advocating for their child. You can kind of go back to the beginning and say, look at where you were here. You really, you had those skills, but you were maybe afraid to use them or were afraid to speak up. But now you're speaking up and you're advocating for your child at the doctor's appointments, at their counseling, at school. So you can really use those progress notes to show the family. And again, the FANS, the assessments we use, can show the family how far they've come. We want to ensure the family has natural supports in place. If they do, we want to point to that family, point it out to the family, the natural supports they have in place. And we can involve the family in events and supports of your agency. So if the family is not quite ready to end services, we can kind of look back at our agency and see, if we do end services, are there other places in our agency that you can be involved? And that's very family driven. The family might be able to come to meetings, empowerment groups at your office if your agency has that kind of thing. Look back to your agency and see if there's anything there for the family to still be involved in. So we are going to go over a brief scenario and we again, we can open up the chat. If you'd prefer taking yourself off mute, we can do this. We want to kind of go over this scenario and see what you would do in this situation. And if there's anything maybe I didn't cover or anything that has worked for you in the past, what we have done. And I will go ahead and read this. You've been working with the Smith family for 3 years. In the last 6 months, you observed them to advocate for their daughter, work together as a family, and increase their communication skills. You met with the family to discuss their treatment plan as they are close to reaching their goals and objectives. The family does not feel they have any other goals they want to work on at this time. However, they're extremely resistant to the idea of discharge. Has anyone ever been through anything like that? And if you have, what have you done that has worked? We can again go off mute if you prefer, or we can put it in the chat. Maybe when the family is calling you, maybe they're not asking you about their goals. Maybe it's just a kind of vent. That's one of the things we can kind of look for when we get to this step. I'll pause here for just a moment. Jessica says push their support visits to monthly. Yeah, and set a goal to build on confidence. That's right. I like that. The confidence goal. Very good. Anything else? Anybody else have anything they want to share?
Hi, yes, this is Ebony here. I don't know, I was thinking like, um, maybe trying to explore why they have like the resistance, like what's driving it? Like, are they afraid of losing support? Are they concerned about setbacks? Are they unsure how to maintain progress? So maybe asking them some questions like, do you have any concerns about maintaining the progress, or is there something you feel you like continued support with, even if it's not part of the original goals? I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said. There is usually a reason. I like to think that there's usually a reason behind families who might be resistant, right? What is that reason? Where is their confidence level at? And like someone had said, maybe set a goal on confidence. Yeah, very good. Thanks for sharing, Ebony. I'll wait another minute or so if anyone else has any comments or anything they'd like to share. Ask what their concerns are, Keely says. Yeah. Finding out what their concerns are. What is the reason they are resistant? Exactly. Claudia says, listen to their fear and anxiety about their concerns. Yeah, so listening to them. Very good. Ebony says, reframe discharge as a transition, not as an ending. Exactly. Yes. A lot of times we really kind of grow and have a professional relationship with these families, right? So it might be hard for that family to think of continuing without your services, especially if you've been working together for a while. So kind of mentioning that as a transition rather than an ending, that's a very good idea. I'm going to move on, but if you'd like to if you have any ideas or any questions, feel free to continue to put those in the chat. I appreciate everyone who chimed in. Okay, so now how can we support a youth or family who is transitioning out of services? So at the age of 21, youth will need to transition into adult services. Some adult services start at the age of 18, so maybe they have some of those services in place. However, they'll no longer be eligible for family peer support services at 21. So how do we prepare a family for that? The first step is communication. So, making sure the family is aware of that, especially if we start working with the family when the youth is close to 21, we want to make sure the family is prepared and understand. So, we want to communicate that to the family. The next is empowerment. We want to ensure the families remain in control. We can ask open-ended questions, how they feel, determine how they feel and what they need for their child. We want to make sure that they are empowered. So when we work with them, getting closer to 21, we want to make sure the youth feels empowered and the family. And then continued and new service referrals. We want to make sure the family has the services in place when we're doing that transition, making sure that they stay on top of the services that they do have. So making sure they have contact information, how to, making sure they have the transportation they need. If they don't have transportation, how do they get that? So making sure that that family can still get to the services that they have in place, and then helping that family with new service referrals. So, helping the family, coaching them through the new services they may need, getting those referrals in, and then following up with the family on those referrals. You know, wait list is a huge thing. Unfortunately, nobody likes a wait list, but they are there. So, what are those excuse me, what do those wait lists look like? Is the family on wait list? If they are on wait list, are there services that they need right now? If there are services they need right now, we can look at the natural and community resources. If there's something that they can't wait for, is that something they can find in their community? Is that something that their friends or family can help with? So like we're talking about transportation. Can we get that from friends or family? So kind of looking at those natural resources when we come across this type of transition. And does the family feel they have adequate support? So kind of looking at what their support circle looks like. Do they feel they have that support when you're not providing these services? They have that support, and if not, how can we get that family that support? And then this is the importance of natural support. So we can't be a superhero. FPAs can support families, but we should not be their only support. It is important to make sure the family feels they have social support as well as community resources in place. So all along, we've been talking a lot about support and what that might look like and the different types of support. So we have support from, the government. So maybe there's some things uh, government supports for them, help with housing, maybe help with food that they can get. We want to make sure that they have those in place if need be. We want to look at community supports. So does the family know where to go in the community for the things they need? So do they know where to go if they need help with housing or if they need help with food, or utilizing those 988 and 211, utilizing those supports, making sure they have all those supports in place, timely supports. So if they need it right now, where can we go to get it right now when there are those wait lists? So some of the supports they might need to look at are mental health care, medical care, financial assistance, legal support, food assistance, and crisis intervention are just some of the supports. We want to make sure they have those in place and where to go for those supports. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a moment before we get into exploring an unplanned discharge. We just kind of covered a lot of information. I want to see if anyone has any questions at this point, any questions or any comments on anything that we just covered. I'll pause a minute here. Again, if you want to take yourself off mute, you may, or you can add a question or comment in the chat about anything we just discussed before we get into unplanned discharge.
Yes, it's me again, Ebony. Hi there, Ashley. And chat, I have a question for whoever's able to answer. I think I may have missed it. But let me see, how am I trying to frame this? Um, Prior to discharge, like how soon should we begin working on it? Is it like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days?
Yeah, great question. And I don't think there's an absolute answer to that. I think that that would be, depending on the family and what their circumstances are. So, if you've been working with the family for, let's say, a year or 2 years, and you really start to see them doing well, we can start having that conversation as early as need be. So maybe you want to plan for 6 months out, or maybe a month or two out. So if we're talking about planned discharges where the family is really doing well, we can take as much time as a family needs. months. Again, and it really depends on everyone's agency. I know everyone's, we all come from different agencies and they have different policies. Some of us are allowed to work with the families longer. I know some of us may be working with families short term. So when we're talking about that planned discharge, it really depends on your agency and with the family. I think the more time we can give the family is better, especially like when we talked about when that family, if the family is kind of resistant, they really like having your services, maybe think about giving them a little bit more time, right? We don't want to spring that on them. I think it was you that mentioned kind of transitioning, putting it as more of a transition, right? So maybe we want to give them 6 months and start working on building their confidence before we discharge them. If it is something where the youth is turning 21, again, I think giving them a longer period of time to kind of transition. And I think that would also depend on, what services the family has in place. If they have a lot of supports and services, maybe we can make that a little bit shorter. Or if they don't have a lot of supports and services, maybe we want to plan a little bit longer before we think about discharge. Maybe a couple months, 6 months, maybe it's a year out that we're talking about a discharge, but really making sure we have a steadfast plan in place. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions or comments? Great question, by the way. I'm just going to wait here for another minute or so to see if any more questions.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, absolutely. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And hopefully I didn't miss this as well. I joined in a few minutes late.
Oh,
You
that's okay.
mentioned venting. You mentioned venting as a possible sign for discharge, and feel free to say if you're going to address it later. When do you know the difference between the venting that still needs to, we need some more time, and the venting that is probably indicative of the need to move on?
Sure. So I think looking at the family goal plan, right? So what are we working on? Maybe you're working on, I'll give an example. If you're working on school, right? And how the child is doing in school. Is the family calling you to vent about a really bad day the child had in school? Or are they calling to, vent about I had a really bad day waking up, the kids were late to school, I burned breakfast. So I really think it depends on what they're venting about, right? If it has to do with some of the goals you're working on or goals that maybe they do want to work on, I think that is one thing. Or if they're just kind of venting about their day, maybe they're complaining about their husband or wife or, the kids getting late to school. I think there's a difference there. So just using those active listening skills and picking out pieces of information and seeing what it is. I don't know if maybe someone has worked with a family that just calls just to talk, right? If that family seems like they're calling just to talk, just for your support, maybe it's leaning more into becoming a friendly relationship rather than a working relationship. I think that would be the difference.
That sounds fair. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give it just another minute or two. So we're going to start exploring what an unplanned discharge is. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. So we're going to examine strategies to prepare families for an unplanned discharge. Okay, so an unplanned discharge, excuse me, an unplanned discharge occurs when some of the goals and objectives have not yet been met. The family may feel they are not ready to be discharged, and circumstances may have changed, making the family ineligible for services. So maybe the family doesn't qualify for services any longer. This could be for a number of reasons. We talked about the youth transitioning at the age of 21. The family could be losing insurance. Um, a number of reasons that the family no longer qualifies. Maybe they have another service that, they can't have dual services. So the family no longer qualifies for services. This is something that can happen for an unplanned discharge. The family wishes to discontinue services. So sometimes the family may want to close services without giving you a reason. Um, they might just say, "Hey, I don't want to work anymore." We can always ask those open-ended questions of try to find out the reason why. We may not always get a reason why, right? The family might just say, "I just don't want to continue services." In those instances, I think it's important to practice self-care and understand that we might not always be the right fit for families. The family just might not want to continue services. And we'll talk a little bit more about that further down. And the family has moved out of your service area. So, again, maybe you work in a certain service area and the family is moving out of that. Can we look where they're moving to and find out, are there other FPAs in that area? Or if not, are there other services in that area? When the family moves out of a service area, you want to make sure that that they still have services. And last, there's a decrease or lack of engagement. Um, Excuse me. So maybe the family, you can't get a hold of them on the phone. Maybe you stop by their house, if that's something you do to see if they're okay and you can't get a hold of them there. Or maybe the family used to call a lot and used to turn to you a lot, but they're not doing so anymore. What does that look like? We will talk about that and how to get through that. So, how do we support the family? We're first going to talk about how to support them through an unplanned discharge. So, unplanned discharge, when this is something that we didn't plan for, something has changed. This usually happens a little more quickly than a planned discharge. So, we want to make sure we support this family through this. Make the referrals as needed to support the family. So what referrals will they need? Are there community supports? Are there other services they need? We want to make sure, if we can, when we are leaving as a family peer advocate, that they have other services in place, and then assist the family in following up on those referrals. Are they on a wait list? Do they need those services right away? What does that look like? And then helping the family put safety plans in place. I like to sometimes create like what I call a toolbox with the family. And that's kind of a list of where they go when different things happen. We want to look at each family's unique circumstances and see what they need, and where they would go for that, and kind of make a toolbox for that family. And then focus on natural resources. Again, where they go in the community. Do they have friends? Do they have family? If they do not, how can we help the family to get natural resources? Are there support groups in their community? This is something we can explore together. Is there groups through your agency or supports through your agency that might be able to help this family? And then what if the family does not wish to continue services, or if the family is not engaging with you? What do we do in those circumstances? I think the first thing to do is to ask an open-ended question. The family may not answer our questions. They might just say that they don't want services, and we might not get closure there. But there may be a reason behind why the family does not want services any longer. Remember, if the family does say they don't want services, we can't take it personally. Um, some of the families we work with, they might be guarded. They may have had bad experiences in the past. If we don't get that closure, if the family does say they don't want to work with us without giving reason, we want to just kind of make sure we take care of ourselves. But if we can find out, is there a reason that the family wants to end services? It could be something cultural based, it could be religion based, a language barrier. Maybe the family is, very busy. They have a lot of service providers. So maybe thinking about some of that. Explore alternative options. So when we ask those open-ended questions, we want to pull information from there. And if it is something where we can get them maybe a different FPA, maybe if it's a single mom, maybe she's not comfortable working with just a male FPA. Maybe can we get a female FPA, or maybe he's a single dad and he's not comfortable working just with a female FPA. Could we get a male FPA? That's just one example of many. So kind of exploring what we can do for this family. If there's a language barrier, can we get a translator for the family? Is there another FPA who maybe speaks their language? Try to find out, explore some of those options for that family to see what we can do rather than just closing. And then discuss potential adjustments to the existing services. If the family is working and they can only meet late at night, maybe they think that, not late at night, maybe 5 or 6. Maybe they think that you can't meet that late. So, kind of talking about scheduling, if that's what it is. Can we adjust services? If, like I said earlier, if they're working with a lot of service providers, maybe we can go to bi-weekly. So, exploring some of that to see what we can do, and then empowering them to make choices. If the family comes to you and states that they don't want to continue services, and they give you reasons that they feel that maybe they finished their goals, and that maybe they don't feel that the service is helpful, empower them to make those choices. If they feel they're doing well and they don't need those services anymore, we want to empower those families, and they're making a decision, and that's what we want to see, is them make those decisions. We can focus on the family's strengths and the progress they've made. And then the family wishes to discontinue services. It's important to actively listen to their concerns, right? We want to make sure are hearing what they say. And then if the family is non-engaging anymore, what does that look like? If they're not calling us, if they're not responding to us, I think the same thing, kind of trying to find out why. Why are they not engaging with us? Are they overwhelmed? Has something happened that maybe they had a bad experience? Maybe Child Protective Services was called and how they're nervous. I think when a family doesn't engage, there's usually a reason behind it. And if we can get through to that reason and support the family, so I think that's important to do. Again, I kind of want to open it up and see if anyone has been in that situation where maybe a family wasn't engaging. What did you do that worked for the family? Or is there something that you think would work? I will pause for a moment. And again, we can pop that in the chat, or we can come off mute to give those suggestions, or if you have any thoughts on that.
I haven't had much problems with the families not engaging, but my team members have. So I take them with me. And it gives the family or the youth a chance to get to know them, and then they don't really have a choice but to engage. It gives them a chance to get more comfortable, even if there's not a lot said, because the presence is just there.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Valerie said, a family I'm working with has been so stressed and a lot of workers in their life. I only work with them when they have the need. That's really great. We have to remember the families we're working with. Sometimes they have a lot of service providers. Maybe it's a medically fragile child, or maybe it's a youth who's dealing with mental health. You're there to support them. And if they don't call us every week, maybe that's okay. We want to really, like Valerie said, we want to work with them when they have that need, right? Thank you. Claudia says, is there a care manager to reach out to and see what's happening? Ask the family engage, or what happened. So finding out what happened with the family, has something changed? Thank you. And yeah, I think working with care managers and some of those other resources is important too. Thank you for sharing that. Has anyone had a family that had stopped engaging and you were able to, get to the bottom of that specifically and continue? I'll give another minute or so if anyone has any comments they'd like to add here.
I've had that a few times,
Yeah.
Ashley, and it's the FPA's relationship.
Mhm.
And I'm on an ACT team, which you know.
Mhm.
So it's been my relationship with the family that basically saved the relationship with the rest of the team.
Yeah, exactly. Um, sometimes the family puts trust in us and maybe they don't have the best relationships with some of those other service providers, and we can kind of be that middleman to help repair that, um, and really help with that family-driven care. Not all service providers have the idea of family-driven care, right? So, as family care advocates, we come in and we find out from the family, what do you want? But other service providers may not do that. A lot of families are used to being told what to do, right? So when we come in, maybe they don't have that trust. Maybe it's going to take a little while to get that trust. And yeah, teaching the family that. Jessica says, I used other contact information, email, and we had on file and found out the mother's phone was shut off. Right. Some of the times the family might be dealing with a crisis, or maybe their phone is shut off, or maybe they had to move. So that's good. Using all the contact information we have for that family.
I don't know.
Hi,
Oh,
hi,
go
hi.
ahead.
This is Rosa. I just had that actually happening this week, regarding a care management, a parent and a child.
Mhm.
And what I did was I usually do clarification of services. It makes a big difference when it comes from a different culture and how people are spoken to, like we mentioned before. And I think
Yeah.
clarification of services and who is who. And I was able to engage the mom and the child back into care management. Literally, it was just happening that this week because the child said, well, I don't need a care manager. All I need is a psychiatrist and a therapist.
Mhm.
And I think from a clinical perspective, care managers, like we say sometimes, all these clinical questions that they have to go through an assessment. I think us FPAs, we take more as more of a parent, kind of connect with the parent, and
Mhm.
our job is not that clinical. And I guess they feel more comfortable with us.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing. Sometimes it does. It takes a little while for families to build trust and might be comfortable with us. So maybe they're working with us, but they're not engaging with other service providers. So um, using our lived experience to connect with that family is something we can do. And, using family driven language, like Rosa had said, instead of some of the clinical language we see from other service providers. Yeah, and working with that family to engage with other service providers. So that's great. I'm going to move on in a minute. If anyone has any comments, I'll give it one more minute and then we'll move on to the next slide. I really appreciate all the conversation and the questions and the comments have come up really great. I think building the trust with the family is important. We kind of mentioned it, but the family really has to see that you're there for them. So it might take a while to build some of that trust, but being patient and consistent with the family is important. If you want to continue to use the chat to ask any questions or comments, feel free to do so, and we will move on to the next slide. So 10 tips for transitioning. We're going to kind of go over a little bit of review. I know this is a lot of information kind of very quickly. So we're going to take a little bit of time and kind of go over this. So involving the family in the process, we want to make sure, no matter what the reason is for discharge, that we are involving the family. We want to be family driven, make sure that they are in control and that they have the power. Make sure that they're involved at each step of the way. So, doing those assessments, going over their family goal plan, making sure that they feel their goals have been completed. Where have you been? Where are you now and where you want to go, kind of figuring that out, but making sure that they are involved. I want you to remember nothing about me without me, right? So we want to make sure the family is involved in everything we do. Start early. Make sure the family is aware of the discharge as soon as possible. Give them a date if possible. So when we're talking about unplanned discharges, we want to try to give the family a timeline. Give them as much time as needed. Someone earlier asked a question, how much time is that? And I think that differs per the family and what circumstances they're going through, but we always want to give them as much time as needed. If this is a planned discharge, let's try to figure out a date. Are we ready in a month? Or is it going to take 6 months for them to feel ready and comfortable? So starting as early as possible and giving them a date. Review the family's service plan, progress, and future goals. So going over the goals the family has had in the past can show them the strengths they have, right? Reminding them of how strong they are, how far they've come, what they've accomplished. Going over if there's any new goals they want to work on is important. And when we're writing our treatment plans and our notes, we can always involve the family and kind of give them a family voice so that when we do review their progress, we have that family voice there that tells you what they feel like they've accomplished. So having that family voice is important. If you have the time to involve families in your note writing, I think that's a good practice. Determine the family's needs. How is this done? Asking the family, right? So finding out what the family needs. We've talked a lot about identifying resources and social supports. What resources does the family have? How to keep those resources? What resources and supports are they going to need? Do they have those supports in place? And if they don't have those supports in place, how can we get those supports? And are they on wait lists? So, all those things are going to determine how long, if we're planning a discharge, how long is it going to take? So making sure they have those supports in place before we close. Prepare the family for discharge by going over safety plans and plan for the future. Making sure that they have a plan in place for for things that come up, right? And making sure they know what they want in the future. What does that future look like? Is it, continuing to do well in school? Is it something different? Complete assessments such as the FANS, the Family Assessment of Needs and Strengths is a tool if you use it. We can use that to measure how far the family has come and use that to measure the family skills that they have now and maybe some skills that they want to strengthen. Refer the family for any needed services. Support the family in accessing these services. Again, are there wait lists? If they are on a wait list, are there services that they need right now? And if there are, can we use the community for that? Wait list, everywhere we go, there's wait lists. So I think that's an important one. And, that can be overwhelming for the family if, they know that they will not be getting services from you anymore, but they're on all these wait lists. It can be really, really overwhelming for that family. So we want to be sure to support the family if we can through that. And assist the family with documentation, maybe giving them their treatment plan so they have that. And what do they feel they need to, what do they feel they accomplished in services? So really pointing out what they accomplished and finding out what they feel they have done and what they want to do. And then last thing is continuing services. Does your organization hold groups the family can attend? So if the family is closing with your services or losing the family peer support services, or maybe they graduated, are there other services that they can get through your agency? Maybe the family wants to share their story, so we can utilize family voice in our agencies, have them tell their stories. It's always very, very powerful. So yeah, doing that. Using the family as much as possible in our agencies to really drive that family-driven care. And then supporting the family after discharge. So once we discharge a family, what does that look like? We kind of talked a little bit earlier about if the family is calling you to vent. Once we discharge, what if that family continues to call you? What does that look like? Where does our relationship go? Different agencies may have different protocols on what the relationship may look like after a family discharges. So we want to refer to our agency and see what some of those policies are. It is important to keep in mind the code of ethics and continue to act in a professional manner once the relationship ends. So once that family peer support relationship ends, what does that look like? We want to make sure we keep that professional. FPA should avoid social media relationships. I know social media is a very big thing now. Some of us live in smaller communities, so maybe we will see the family out in the community. We want to continue that professional relationship. And then utilizing community resources and natural supports with family. So maybe the family is calling you with questions after or things they may need. We can utilize some of those community resources and the natural supports. I had mentioned earlier making like a toolbox for the family. So we can kind of refer back to that and say, hey, we discussed, if you need food, there's this food pantry. So kind of referring them back to the community and some of those resources we had talked about before. And then I want to touch base on the Code of Ethics. Specifically, this specific code is Code of Ethics Commitment to Partnership. So we are partnering with families, right? So I'm going to go ahead and read this and we'll talk about it. So actively seek out ways to partner with other service providers. So we had talked about making sure they have supports in place, right? How can us as family peer advocates partner with some of these other service providers? Maybe care managers. Somebody had mentioned earlier, other service providers using clinical language. We can kind of, I don't want to say teach, but maybe coach other service providers how to use that family-driven practice and kind of work as the middleman between the family and other service providers to really help that family voice be heard. So actively seek out partnerships with other service providers. That's going to benefit the family in the end. A work to enhance one's knowledge of complex systems. So when we're, getting ready to discharge families, helping them work through some of those systems that might be difficult, right? Some of those wait lists, how to navigate some of the wait lists, and how to put in referrals to other places that might be difficult for families. So that's something we can support them through. And when we enhance our knowledge of those systems, it'll help the families in the end. Create teams, including family members, to help create solutions together. So we want to work with the family, work with the care manager, work with, support staff at school and help create solutions together. Work with families to promote their own advocacy skills. So we want to work ourselves out of a job. Help that family advocate for themselves and their child using their own voice. The family voice is the strongest. The family is the expert on their youth, right? So we really want to make sure that that family voice is heard. When the family feels heard and supported, I think the transition out of services will go a little better when they have confidence in themselves. And again, partner with community organizations to connect families to natural supports. So knowing what supports are out there in your community and having your community know about family peer advocacy so you can kind of work together to give this family the most support. And utilizing the expertise of colleagues. I think it was Michelle who mentioned using her colleagues, right? So at your agency, if you have other coworkers, you are a team there as well. So, when we are discharging a family or when we're transitioning, you can use the expertise of other family or other coworkers, excuse me. Find out what they have been through and find out what has worked for them. Find out, what community resources they know about. So you really utilizing your colleagues. And how can families be more involved? So we're coming to an end here where we have worked with families. We see that they're advocating for themselves. They're using family voice. How can families be more involved in our agencies? And how can that family-driven practice, how can we enhance that? So maybe your family or maybe your agency has a family advisory councils. Can families tell their stories? Can they be part of advisory councils where they help make those changes? the policies in our state, the ones who are going to know what needs to be done the most are the ones who have been through it, right? So our families, giving families their voice, can help change some of the policies that need to be done. Sharing their story is a very powerful thing. So being able to say what happened to them, explain how they've made it through, using that family voice to share their stories. Perhaps families can be involved in empowerment groups or other groups your agency might be hosting. Are there ways, the family can still be involved? I know some agencies allow the families to attend empowerment groups after their services, their peer support services ended, so they could still use that as a tool. And using their expertise for hiring new employees. It's great to have families involved in your agency when you are hiring. Use those families who have been through it. Use those families who know what they want and what they need, and involving them in agency decisions. We can bring the families we work with into our agencies and utilize their voice. And then this is a reflection question. I'm gonna pause here again. I want you to think about your agency that you're coming from. I know we're all over the state. In what ways does your agency involve families? So do you have advisory councils? Do you have groups that you let families attend? Maybe there's groups in the evening, maybe you do empowerment groups, maybe you do trainings online like we're doing now. And what can you do to ensure family voice is heard in your agency? This is something you can think about, or if you'd like to add an answer in the chat, you're more than welcome to. I'll just pause here for a minute. And I just want us to really think about our agency and how we can involve those family voices and get the families involved in our community. Feel free to put that in the chat, and I will be moving on to the next slide. One of the things we can do, whether we have a planned discharge or an unplanned discharge, is ending on a positive note. So when we are working with these families, a lot of times, as many of you had said, um, we create that close relationship with the families, right? And sometimes we are able to work with the other service providers, and maybe we're the only one that our families trust, right? So when we think about that professional relationship coming to an end, that might be hard for us, and it might be hard for the families that we work with. So we want to try to end that on a positive, giving ourselves closure, giving that family closure, and really letting them know how far they've come. So a couple of things I came up with that we can do is creating a supportive toolbox. Maybe that's a binder. We call it a toolbox, but maybe that's a binder that has everything they need in it to support them and what they need. Community resources, just kind of creating that thing that they can hold on to support them. So that could mean a whole lot of different things. I'm going to pause for a moment because we have some comments. Michelle says that their agency has a lot of groups during the day and in the evening, which is great. Erica says they also have family groups. And Jessica says we involve our families by engaging them with different events and groups throughout the agency and getting feedback from them about what did and didn't work. So they are talking about our previous slide of how to involve families with the agency, which is great. Sorry to go back and forth. So we are talking about, we created a supportive toolbox because that's something we can do with the family. And that we could, give them some of their, maybe their treatment plan, maybe some of their assessments to kind of show them where they've been and the strengths. Maybe make a beaded bracelet. That's something we can do with families to kind of remind them. Maybe we can use different color beads to represent different things. Just an activity that you can do together. Just being aware, maybe there's craft items at your agency. Just kind of seeing what you have there and what you can do. maybe making a memory book of all their accomplishments. Again, that's going to empower the family, kind of show them where they've been and what they have accomplished. And then making a positive message jar. This is one that I really like. When we are not in the family's house from week to week, how can we keep them positive and how can we continue to empower them? We can make, I like to use little popsicle sticks and put like a positive message on it, or just maybe a reminder of something they did. And the family can kind of keep that somewhere and use that from time to time to remember what they've done and where they've come. Is there anything else you guys do with families before we transition out of services? Someone recently, Kevin says someone recently recommended the idea of a graduation from a group. Yeah, so maybe doing a graduation party for a family, or having them have a picture. If they're comfortable with that in your agency, maybe we can have them like a picture or like a graduation certificate on the wall in your agency. This activity is really a way to, especially when you have that positive relationship, kind of end that relationship on a positive note, um, and just give yourself closure and give that family closure, and really celebrating their success and the strengths and how far they've come. And the next thing is just taking care of yourselves. A lot of times, like I said, we form close relationships with families. Maybe they close or maybe they transitions out of services and they didn't give you a reason why, and we don't have that closure. We're worried about them, and we really want to make sure we practice self-awareness and self-care. So, how do we do that? Be aware of your own feelings and emotions. Maybe you worked with family for a couple years and not going to their home. Maybe it's difficult for you. You want to make sure you're aware of that. Discuss how you're feeling in supervision. So when you have, your supervision, you use your supervisor and let them know how you're feeling and kind of work through that. Don't be afraid to take time off if needed. Use as much time as you need when you're transitioning out of services with a family. Be kind to yourself by doing something you enjoy. Practice a stress reduction. So maybe we do deep breathing. I like to use essential oils at my desk to kind of help me throughout the day. And discover and use your own coping skills. So, what does it look like when you transition out of services with a family you've worked with for a long time? Are there skills you use to kind of help you? If you'd like to throw, Maria says a ritual for a family healing journey ceremony. I love that. That's really great. A dinner. That's a dinner, Maria said. So maybe that's really cool. Maybe having some of those things to kind of bring that transition to an end. Kind of working uh, over yourself and the family to get as much closure as you need. But I really want to make sure we are taking care of ourselves in these relationships. Okay, and that concludes the information that I have. I appreciate everybody coming today. You can continue to put your questions in.
Thank you, Ashley. We're gonna begin answering any questions. Ashley was able to answer a few during the presentation. But if there are any more questions, this is your time to put it through the chat box. Tiffany?
I just have a question. So I'm in a youth act program also, and we just hit our 1 year mark, and we're getting ready to discharge our first like planned discharge, and we I I brought it up to the parents about a month ago because the team was talking about it. The youth has met their goals. They're everything that they came to the program for, they've gone through. And the parents are very resistant. The dad, for instance, I mean, he just is highly opposed to it. He's like, no, just hang on till August. Like, I need you guys through August. And it's like I'm trying to explain to him, well, she's graduating, she's done great, but we have another meeting with him next week because he's still like, he thought that because he told me he didn't want to, that it was going to stop the process, but that's not how it works with our program. And so now he's frustrated because he's like, like, what do you mean discharge again? Like, he just thought it was going to go away. So now we're having these conversations again. And I offered to him, I'm like, maybe, can we have like a group family meeting with the clinicians and him to try to help them break it down for him more, because he just wasn't getting it from me. And they agreed to do that. It's just kind of like, how do you support him, like getting him to realize that it's okay. Like, he's just afraid of what could happen. Like, what's going to happen if she regresses, I guess, is the biggest thing. Like, how do you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. And I want to commend you because I think when a family is resistant to our services ending, I think that speaks volumes on what you've done as an FPA. So clearly the family has really trusted you. Family driven care and using that family voice is super powerful. So you mentioned that he's nervous because of what might happen, right?
Yeah.
So kind of going over that with him. So asking questions of what uh, what do you think might happen? So maybe I'm not sure what's going on with the youth and you don't have to share, but um maybe if the youth has a meltdown or like mental health, something's going on with their mental health. What can we do? So what has worked in the past maybe, and kind of finding some of those resources and kind of giving them numbers to call and kind of making a plan for that. So kind of really asking him open-ended questions like you have as to what his concerns are and making a plan for those specific concerns. And then, planning out your time with them. It sounds
I,
like you've done a really great job so far.
Thank you.
I have a question for you too, Tiffany. This is Michelle from the Youth Act team. As in thinking about discharge, does he know, do you guys have good services? And that probably sounds worse than I mean it to, but services in place for him, like Chunny services, so children's health homes and a case manager to be there with that youth, that can work with the youth and the parent if needed, or another parent partner from a different agency that's kind of like us as an FPA, but not quite.
I'm gonna look into that with my supervisor, because I know, like, we're getting his thing. What tipped him off again is because we're getting the releases to talk to the primary to take over med management again and things like that. And so it was getting him all stressed out again. But I'm not sure about other parent. I know we were doing care management. We offered it, and instantly he's like, we don't need all that. But it's like, there's only so many options to step down from this level of treatment. So yeah.
Yeah, so I actually have a question. So when you first started services with him, was he resistant to your services?
Well, no, when we first started services with the child was living with mom.
Okay.
And since then, there's been custody issues, and now child's staying with dad. Primary placement was granted, like they went through that. So mom was always, and he's been always like ready, because this is the first time, and the child's 14, and that's the first time he's taking on the primary parental role. So like, he was very like, yes, please help me with everything. And I think that's kind of where this is coming from. Like, now what? Like,
So he's panicking pretty much.
yeah.
So again, so I would go back and kind of show him where he's been and what he has accomplished so far, him and the youth, right? And kind of showing him some of his own strengths, and letting him know that, like you had said, it is okay, and that he's able to advocate for his child and for his family, and kind of helping him build that confidence he needs, it sounds like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Tiffany. This is Rose. I think I most of my families, that's exactly what I gone through. It's really hard, that detachment. But I think if they see it in writing, what they've gone through, they're like they what they've been successful in, what they are able to accomplish. For me, it's really hard because they want to call me for everything, especially because most of my families, there's a language barrier. So it's like really hard to detach. But the way I learned how to do it is kind of showing them in writing what they have done, their accomplishments. But what has helped me the most is kind of, okay, let's start with one phone call a week, right? And then kind of every other week, and then little by little, they get used to it, and I'll be like, okay, you can do it, right? And just check in with me and send in a text. I did it, and like, and then I praise them, and I'm so proud of you. And I think that has helped me in the past 13 years being an FPA. Like, that's what's been helpful, them seeing it, but also detaching little by little, because it's really difficult when the family, it's just, this is us, this is FPAs, everyone wants to be around us, and having that hand holding, that's what they're used to and that's what they need. So just, if it helps you, that's what's been helpful to me.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely think that would be helpful for him too.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Rosa.
We
And
have
thank you for
another
sharing, Tiffany.
question. Um, do you have wraparound services to step down to?
Was that a question for me?
Yeah, I think it was for the family if they have wraparound services.
Not with us right now. No. So we would go directly right to outpatient therapy, and their primary care doctor. Like, we would set that up, make sure that they're in there, but as far as like anything with our agency after that, no.
That's what she means by wraparound services,
Yeah.
is
Oh,
whatever the step down services are that are going to
okay.
be taking care of the youth and family after you.
Okay. Yeah. So we're making sure that that's all set up and take it, like, as far as the therapy, the outpatient, and the med management and things like that will be all handled. That's all being done by our clinical service staff is doing that. I don't know if I answered that right.
So I think you have. Thank you for sharing. Looks like Jerry has a question. They say, "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm new to the family CRPA. I just completed the training in January and waiting on my state credential. I'm the first family CRPA at this agency, Argus Community in Bronx, New York, but I've been working as a CRPA here for 4 years. My plan is to get the agency to provide services to clients' families. Any suggestions or recommendations?" So working with families, family-driven care is super important. I think if that answers your question, making sure that family voice is heard, and really practicing getting the family's point of view, if that answers it, and if anyone else has any suggestions. Yeah, congratulations on that. Thank you. That's what Ebony said. Congratulations.
All right, can you hear me? Thank you. I appreciate the comments, right? And looking forward to being some assistance and trying to get the client's family involved in their recovery. That's my goal.
Getting them involved in recovery, are they resistant to it?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. It's just that I'm the first one to at this agency to complete the family serpent training and fulfill all the requirements. And I'm just waiting on Oasis Certainty to send me my credentials. And then we're gonna see where we can proceed from there.
Sounds really great. I appreciate you getting that credential. Congratulations on that. And yeah,
And the information that you provided today has been most helpful. I took quite a bit of notes. and we shall see.
Absolutely. I think you're going to do really great. As Tiffany had mentioned, when we use that family driven care and we give that family their voice, they tend to really want to stay around us, right? So, yeah, I think you're going to do amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I'll give another minute or two for some questions and we'll go on to upcoming events. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Erica says to Jerry, congrats. That's a great dual certification.
Well, Ashley, I believe that's the last question.
Okay. So we will upcoming CTAC events.
Yes. So, here we have an upcoming CTAC event, the clinical intensive on creating trusting relationships, the LEAP approach for developing partnerships with adult service participants who lack self-awareness in their mental health condition. That will be held on April 1st at 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. We also have considerations for youth with mental health and intellectual development disabilities diagnosis. And that will be held on April 23rd at 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. And to see the list of additional resources, you can download the slides from our website, and to find a full list for upcoming events, you can visit the website as well. So thank you, Ashley, for a great presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Please visit the CTAC website at ctacny.org for helpful information, including the recording and slides to this presentation, which will be posted within the next business days, 2 to 3. Our coordinator will be sending a link in the chat box for you to complete a brief feedback survey. And on behalf of FTNYS and CTAC and Ashley, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for joining us.